An old German shepherd kept appearing at a retired Navy SEAL's fence. He never begged for food, never barked for attention. He only waited in the snow. Then one morning, he brought something strange to the porch: a broken radio headset. On its side were 3 faded words: "Keep listening." Everett Knox had spent years trying to escape every voice that needed him. But this dog had not come to reveal a secret. He had come to reopen a wound. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. By the time Everett Knox turned 61, he had learned that silence was not always peace. Sometimes silence was only a room where all the old voices had finally run out of breath. His cabin stood at the ragged edge of Icicle Ridge, Washington, where the forest climbed steep and dark toward winter peaks, and the snow did not fall like sorrow. It fell bright. It came down in clean sheets under a pale blue sky, covering pine boughs, split logs, the tin roof, the old truck, and the narrow footpath from the porch to the woodpile, until the whole world looked newly forgiven. Everett did not trust that kind of beauty. Beauty, in his experience, had a bad habit of standing beside ruin and pretending not to know it. He lived alone in a one-room cabin he had repaired with his own hands. The walls were cedar, the stove was iron, and the windows faced a slope of fir trees so thick that on snowy mornings they seemed less like trees than a congregation of old men in white robes waiting for a verdict. There was a kitchen table scarred by knife marks, a radio shelf he rarely used, a rack of tools, 3 pairs of boots by the door, and no photographs on the mantel. Photographs invited questions. Questions invited stories. Stories invited people to stay. Everett had arranged his life so that nothing stayed unless he fed it, sharpened it, stacked it, or nailed it down. Firewood stayed. Coffee stayed. The roof, after repeated arguments with wind and gravity, mostly stayed. People did not. That was not bitterness, he told himself. It was maintenance. Each morning he woke before dawn, though there was no command to answer any more. His body still rose as if some invisible officer had barked his name in the dark. He dressed without turning on the lamp: thermal shirt, canvas pants, wool socks, boots. On colder days, he pulled on the olive-drab combat shirt he had never quite been able to throw away, its fitted body faded from years of use, its camouflage sleeves worn soft at the elbows. Across the biceps, the old horizontal band still showed. On his right forearm, beneath the cuff, the Navy SEAL tattoo had blurred with age, the ink softened, but not gone. Like a brand, the skin had forgiven, but not forgotten. He was tall, a little over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, still strong in the way old doors were strong, not pretty, but stubborn. His dark brown hair, now threaded with gray, had grown too long at the back. He kept meaning to cut it. He kept not doing it. His beard was short and rough, salt and pepper, the kind of beard that made him look either wise or difficult, depending on the light and the patience of the person looking. No one looked for long any more. That suited him. The closest town, Marlow Basin, sat below the ridge with its bakery lights, ski rental shops, warm sidewalks, and cheerful flags advertising winter packages. Everett went down twice a month for supplies, and once more if the weather bullied him into it. He knew the cashier at the general store by face, not name. He knew the pharmacist had a limp, the diner changed pies on Thursdays, and the post office clerk liked to talk about road closures as if they were personal betrayals. He knew enough. Knowing more was how a person got recruited back into the human race, and Everett Knox had taken early retirement from that particular army. He did not hate people. That would have required a kind of energy he no longer possessed. Hate was hot. It needed tending. What he felt was older and colder. Weariness, maybe? The long exhaustion of a man who had spent too many years being useful in rooms where usefulness meant walking toward the sound everyone else fled, He had walked toward gunfire, toward smoke, toward broken metal and bad news, and the kind of screams men made when they were trying not to scream. He had carried friends who grew lighter with every step. He had stood in doorways and decided who moved first. He had come home with all his limbs and still somehow not entirely returned. His marriage had ended quietly, which almost made it worse. No thunder, no thrown plates, just a woman named Elise who had loved him until loving him felt like knocking on a locked house during a blizzard. "You're alive," she had told him once, not cruelly. "But you keep making me prove it." He had not known how to answer. Years later, he still did not. So he came to Icicle Ridge. He bought a cabin with bad plumbing and a view of the mountains. He learned which logs burned slow, which clouds meant hard freeze, which silence belonged to weather, and which belonged to memory. He shrank his life down until it fit inside one pair of hands. Wood, coffee, snow, repair, no one calling his name. For almost 2 years the arrangement held. Then Bishop started coming to the fence. The first time Everett saw him, the dog sat beyond the split rail line at the edge of the trees, half shadow, half snowlight. A German shepherd, male, large through the chest, yellow and black, with a heavy winter coat and a head carried high. His back was dark as a storm cloud, his legs and chest burnished gold, and his muzzle had begun to silver around the edges. One ear stood clean. The other, the left, bore a crescent-shaped scar along the rim, as if the mountain had taken one bite and regretted not taking more. Everett had been carrying an armload of split pine. He stopped. The dog watched him. "Lost?" Everett asked. The dog did not answer, which Everett considered one of his better qualities. He set the wood down inside the porch rack and went in. When he came back out 10 minutes later with a heel of bread he had no intention of admitting was stale, the dog was still there. Everett tossed the bread into the snow. The dog looked at it, then looked back at Everett. "Oh, you're that kind," Everett said. The dog sat straighter. Everett squinted through the pale morning glare. There was an old leather collar around the dog's neck, dark brown, worn smooth by years of weather and work. A metal tag hung from it, too frosted to read at that distance. "You got a home?" The dog blinked once. Everett sighed, went back inside, and told himself that whatever answer the animal had given, it was not his problem. The dog came again the next day, and the next, never at the same hour, though always when the light had some strange ceremony in it. Early morning blue, late afternoon gold, noon glare shining off the snow so fiercely the world seemed carved from bone. Bishop, as Everett eventually remembered he was called, never crossed the fence. He never barked for food, never whined, never pawed. He simply appeared, sat, and watched. A lesser dog might have begged. Bishop conducted an audit. Everett knew him by reputation before he admitted knowing him at all. Silver Lantern Pass, the ski area on the far side of Marlow Basin, had once kept a small winter rescue unit before the resort began dressing itself up in glass balconies and expensive words. Bishop had worked that mountain with a handler named Gideon Pike. Everyone in the valley seemed to know Gideon's name in the way towns know the names of men who once helped them survive storms, warmly, vaguely, and with decreasing responsibility. Gideon had died several years earlier, not in a single dramatic moment, but by the slower cruelty that followed injury. Complications, people said. A rescue accident, they said. Bad luck, they said, as if bad luck were a man with a clipboard who made official visits. After Gideon, Bishop had stayed with his widow, Lenora Pike, the retired radio coordinator from North Lantern Relay. Everett had seen Lenora twice in town. A small woman with silver hair cut to her jaw, a red wine scarf at her throat, and the unnerving calm of someone who could listen to panic without becoming it. She had once nodded to Everett in the hardware store. He had nodded back. That was the whole relationship, and he had considered it complete. But Bishop kept coming. By the second week, Everett stopped offering food. By the third, he began speaking to the dog despite himself. "You know," he said one afternoon while repairing a loose shutter, "there are easier men to haunt." Bishop sat in the snow and watched a screw fall from Everett's fingers. Everett climbed down the ladder, picked it up, and pointed it at him. "Don't start." The dog's tail moved once, not a wag, more like punctuation. That was the trouble with Bishop. He did not behave like a stray or a pet or even a retired working dog looking for old habits. He behaved like a messenger from a kingdom Everett had renounced. Not urgent, not pleading, worse, certain. And certainty had always irritated Everett, especially when it was correct. On the 17th morning, the snow came bright and fine, drifting sideways through sunlight. Everett woke with a headache behind his eyes and the taste of an old dream in his mouth. He could not remember the whole dream, only a sound from it, radiostatic, thin and hungry, reaching through dark. He sat on the edge of the bed until the stove clicked and the cabin settled around him. "Nothing," he muttered. The room, being honest, did not agree. He made coffee too strong, burned his tongue, and went outside carrying an axe. The air was cold enough to make the inside of his nose sting. Down in Marlow Basin, the ski lifts would already be turning, hauling tourists up into the glittering heights. Somewhere, people were laughing into scarves, taking photographs, falling badly, getting up, falling again. He could almost admire the courage of it, paying money to be humbled by gravity. He split wood until his shoulders warmed and the old ache in his right knee loosened. The axe rose and fell. Pine cracked open. His breath smoked. For a while, the world became simple. Then he heard the soft crunch of paws. Everett lowered the axe. Bishop stood just beyond the porch steps. This time, he was inside the fence. Everett's grip tightened. The dog held something in his mouth. It was not food, not a bone, not a glove stolen from some careless tourist. Bishop stepped forward and laid the object carefully on the bottom porch step, as if placing an offering at an altar. Everett stared. It was an old radio headset. The foam was rotted. The cord was stiff and cracked, one end chewed or torn loose. Ice clung to the black plastic in little clear teeth. A smell came off it even through the cold. Wet wood, dust, metal, and something faintly human, like a room that had held its breath for years. Everett did not move. Bishop backed up one pace and sat. The forest went still in the way forests do when they are not empty at all, only listening. Everett set the axe against the chopping block. He took 2 steps closer. The headset lay half buried in powder, its ear cup turned upward. Along the side, beneath scratches and frost, white lettering had faded almost to ghost marks. He crouched. His right hand hovered above it. For a moment, he was no longer on his porch. He was in another cold place, another kind of dark, hearing a voice break through static. Not words, not yet, only the shape of need. The unbearable fact of someone reaching out because they believed there was still somebody on the other end. Everett stood abruptly. "No," he said. Bishop's ears shifted. "No," Everett repeated, this time to the dog, the headset, the trees, the past, and whatever committee of ghosts had apparently decided his retirement was up for review. He picked up the headset between 2 fingers, carried it to the rusted barrel where he kept scrap metal and useless parts, and dropped it in. It landed with a hollow clack. "There," Everett said. "Message delivered. Message declined." Bishop rose. Everett expected him to leave. Instead, the dog walked to the barrel, lowered his head, and with surprising delicacy pulled the headset back out by the remaining cord. He carried it to the porch step again, placed it where it had been before, and set one large front paw on top of it. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just firmly. Everett looked at the dog. Bishop looked back. Snow gathered along the scar in his left ear. His amber eyes were calm, almost sorrowfully patient. He did not seem like an animal asking to be understood. He seemed like an old judge waiting for a man to stop insulting the evidence. Everett let out a humorless laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." Bishop did not move. The wind pushed snow across the yard in shining veils. Somewhere far below, a plow groaned on the road. The cabin behind Everett smoked gently from its chimney, warm and private and small. Everything he had chosen waited there. The narrow bed, the locked silence, the coffee gone bitter in the cup. Everything he had avoided waited in front of him, under the paw of a German shepherd. Everett crouched again, slower this time. He wiped snow from the side of the headset with his thumb. The old lettering emerged by degrees, stubborn as a name carved into stone. North Lantern Relay. Keep listening. The word struck him with a force he did not want to show. Keep listening, not rescue, not fight, not charge, not save the day with a knife between your teeth and a hymn in your blood. Just listen. Somehow that felt worse. Everett's throat tightened. He hated that. He hated the small betrayal of the body, how it remembered grief before the mind gave permission. His fingers closed around the headset. The plastic was cold enough to burn. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Bishop lifted his paw. That was all. No bark, no nudge, no miracle, just the release of the thing he had brought. Everett looked toward the tree line. Beyond it, hidden by ridge and weather, lay Silver Lantern Pass with its polished windows and groomed slopes and whatever remained of North Lantern Relay. He had not been up that way in years. He had made sure of it. A man could build a life out of not going places. He could stack the reasons neatly. Bad roads, bad knees, bad memories, no business there. He could make solitude sound like wisdom if he spoke slowly enough. He could call it peace. People might even believe him. A dog would not. Everett tucked the headset under his arm and stood. Bishop stepped aside. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The snow kept falling through the sunlight, absurdly beautiful, bright as powdered glass. Everett felt the old familiar resistance rise in him, hard and practiced. He could still toss the headset back into the barrel. He could go inside, lock the door, let the coffee burn down to mud, let the day pass. No one had called his name. No human voice had asked for help. Only a dog had crossed a fence with a dead piece of radio equipment and the patience of judgment. Everett looked down at Bishop. "I'm not following you today." Bishop's tail moved once. Everett pointed toward the trees. "I mean it." Bishop sat. Everett exhaled through his nose. "Fine. Sit there and freeze. That's a strategy." He turned toward the cabin, climbed the porch steps, and opened the door. Warm air breathed out around him. He stepped inside, then stopped. Behind him, Bishop remained in the yard. The dog had not followed. That, more than anything, unsettled Everett. Bishop was not trying to enter his house. He was not asking for shelter. He was not asking for anything easy. Everett looked at the headset beneath his arm. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller than it had that morning. He went to the radio shelf, cleared away a layer of dust with his sleeve, and set the headset beside the old receiver he had not touched in months. He did not plug it in. He did not turn anything on. He only stood there, listening to the stove tick, the wind press against the glass, and the blood moving in his own ears. Outside, through the window, Bishop sat in the snow like a dark gold statue. Everett rested 2 fingers on the headset. Once, years ago, he had believed the worst sound in the world was a call you could not answer. Now he wondered if it was worse to know you might have answered and chose not to hear. He did not go to North Lantern that day, but he did not throw the headset away again. And when the evening came and the blue shadows rose between the trees, Everett Knox found himself doing something he hadn't done in a very long time. He left the porch light on. Everett Knox did not follow Bishop the next morning. He made that clear to the empty cabin while grinding coffee beans with more violence than coffee deserved. He made it clear to the stove while feeding it split pine. He made it clear to the old radio headset sitting on the shelf beside the receiver where it had no business looking patient. "I'm not taking orders from a dog," he said. The cabin offered no support. Outside, morning came down bright over Icicle Ridge, white and gold, the kind of winter morning tourists believed in before they learned what cold could do to fingers. The porch light, still burning from the night before, looked foolish in daylight. Everett stood in the doorway with a mug in his hand and stared at it. He had meant to turn it off. He had also meant to throw the headset away. A man could lose a war one small failure at a time. Bishop appeared at the fence just after 7. This time the German shepherd did not sit in judgment. He stood facing the tree line, yellow-black coat shining under the snowlight, breath rising from his muzzle in steady clouds. The crescent scar in his left ear caught a rim of frost. He glanced once at Everett, then turned back toward the woods. "No," Everett said. Bishop began walking. Everett stayed where he was for nearly 10 seconds, which he later considered a respectable defense. Then he swore, set down the mug, grabbed his field jacket, and took the headset from the shelf. He did not put it on. He shoved it into the inside pocket of his jacket as if hiding contraband from himself. Bishop did not look surprised when Everett stepped off the porch. That annoyed Everett more than it should have. The trail rose behind the cabin, narrow and half buried under fresh powder. Bishop moved ahead with the unhurried confidence of an animal who knew winter by its private names. He did not bound or sniff at every stump. He placed each paw carefully, choosing the packed ridges beneath the new snow. Everett followed at a distance, boots sinking deeper than he liked, his knee complaining after the first incline, and his pride telling it to shut up. The forest thickened around them. Icicle Ridge in sunlight was not soft. It was too bright for softness. Snow flashed on every branch. The trunks of the firs stood black and wet, rising like pillars in some old northern temple where gods had gone quiet but not left. Wind combed powder from the high boughs and dropped it in glittering veils. Somewhere above, a raven made a rude comment about the weather. Everett approved of ravens. They never pretended to be inspirational. The farther they climbed, the more the world below disappeared. Marlow Basin vanished first, swallowed by trees. Then the last road sounds faded. No plow, no truck, no distant lift machinery from Silver Lantern Pass. Only breath, snow, the hush of branches, and Bishop's steady movement through the white. After 20 minutes, Everett saw the first sign. It leaned beside a half-frozen drainage ditch, nearly hidden by snow. North Lantern Relay, the lettering said, though moss and age had made the words look like they were surfacing from underwater. Beneath it, someone had once painted an arrow. The paint had peeled until only a blue wound remained. Bishop stopped at the sign. Everett stopped behind him. "I know how signs work," he muttered. The dog continued. The relay station appeared not all at once, but in pieces. First the antenna tower rising through the trees, its metal ribs glazed in ice and catching the sun like a spear held upright by a giant buried beneath the mountain. Then the roof, low and steep, built to shed snow. Then the small building itself, timber walls dark with age, storm shutters hooked open, a stovepipe leaning slightly, but still proud enough to offend gravity. It was not abandoned. That was the first thing Everett noticed. Someone had shoveled the path recently, not cleanly, but with stubbornness. Smoke drifted from the stovepipe in a thin gray thread. A pair of old snowshoes hung beside the door. Wind chimes made from bent metal tags tapped gently under the eave, their sound small and dry. Bishop climbed the steps and pushed his nose against the door. From inside, a woman's voice said, "If that is you, Bishop, you are either early or guilty." Everett froze. Bishop looked back at him. The door opened. Lenora Pike stood in the frame, wearing a cream wool sweater under a navy cardigan, gray trousers tucked into practical boots, and a red wine scarf wrapped once around her neck. She was smaller than Everett remembered from town, but distance had done her no justice. Up close she seemed made of wire, weather, and will. Her silver hair was cut to her jaw, tucked behind one ear with a metal clip. Her face had fine lines around the eyes, not delicate lines but earned ones, like cracks in ice that had held weight for years. On her left wrist, loose against the bones, was a man's old watch. She looked at Bishop first, then at Everett. "Well," she said, "he brought the large one." Everett did not answer. Lenora stepped aside. "You may as well come in before you both stand there pretending this wasn't planned by someone." "I didn't plan anything," Everett said. "No," Lenora replied. "That was obvious from the way you're dressed for irritation instead of altitude." Bishop walked in. Everett considered leaving, which would have been cleaner, simpler, and entirely possible if his feet had belonged to someone else. Instead, he ducked through the doorway. The inside of North Lantern Relay smelled of cedar smoke, paper, dust, coffee, and old electricity. It was one large room divided by purpose rather than walls. Along one side stood radio equipment from several decades, gray metal boxes, newer units with digital displays, coiled cords, microphones, backup batteries, and a switchboard marked by hand. The opposite wall held maps under cloudy plastic, some official, some hand-drawn, all scarred by pencil lines and colored pins. A potbelly stove glowed in the corner. Near it sat a small table with 2 mugs, a stack of notebooks, and a tin of shortbread cookies. Everett noticed the cookies against his will. Bishop went directly under the main radio desk, turned once, and lay down with his head on his paws. Not like a visitor, like staff. Lenora saw Everett watching and said, "He still thinks he's on shift." "Dogs don't retire well," Everett said. "Neither do certain men, apparently." Everett looked at her. Lenora lifted an eyebrow. "Coffee?" "No." She poured him a mug anyway. He took it, because refusing would have required more conversation. For a while, Lenora said nothing. She moved around the room with the particular economy of someone who knew where every object belonged because she had placed it there during storms, emergencies, and nights when order was the only weapon left. She adjusted a dial that did not seem to need adjusting. She closed a notebook. She set the shortbread tin closer to Everett without looking at him. "I'm not here for a memorial," he said. "No," she said. "You're here because Bishop stole my headset." Everett touched the inside of his jacket where the old headset rested. Lenora's eyes went there immediately. "He didn't steal it," Everett said. "He has no income and did not ask permission. That is the definition." Despite himself, Everett almost smiled. Almost was safer. He pulled the headset from his pocket and set it on the table. Lenora's hand did not reach for it at first. Her gaze changed before the rest of her did. The room seemed to draw a small breath. "That was Gideon's training set," she said. Everett looked down at the cracked plastic. "Your husband?" "My husband. Bishop's first and only true commanding officer, if you ask Bishop. I was merely management." At the sound of Gideon's name, Bishop opened his eyes, but did not lift his head. Lenora noticed. Of course she noticed. She picked up the headset with both hands, not reverently exactly, but carefully, as if an old object could bruise if handled without memory. Her thumb moved over the faded lettering. "North Lantern Relay," she read softly. "Keep listening." Everett felt the words land in the room differently than they had on his porch. Here, they were not mysterious. They were familiar, worn, used, a rule once spoken often enough to become part of the furniture. Lenora set the headset beside the radio desk. That was Gideon's phrase. He used it on new volunteers who thought rescue was mostly about rope, strength, and dramatic timing. "It isn't?" "Oh, it is," she said. "If you want the version they put on brochures." "I see." She crossed to the map wall and tapped a faded topographic sheet. Real rescue is listening long enough to know what someone is not saying. A calm voice can mean training. It can also mean shock. A man insisting he is fine may be 2 minutes from confusion. A lost skier who says he can see lights may be looking at stars. Everett said nothing. Lenora glanced back. "You know that?" He disliked how gently she said it. Bishop shifted under the desk, pressing his shoulder against Lenora's boots. Not dramatically, just enough contact to anchor her. Everett saw it and looked away. Lenora opened a wooden cabinet beneath the maps. Inside were binders, notebooks, cassette cases, old digital recorders, envelopes bundled with twine. Not a secret vault, not evidence hidden behind a false wall. Just the patient clutter of a life that refused to throw away voices. "This is what Bishop wanted you to see," she said. "Bishop wants a lot for a dog who won't eat stale bread." "He has standards." "Oisna?" Everett stared at the cabinet. "If this is about Silver Lantern Pass, I don't work for them." "Neither do most of the people in these books anymore. That's part of the trouble." She pulled out a notebook with a green cloth cover and laid it on the table. The pages were filled in neat handwriting: dates, weather, rescue calls, names, injuries, routes, equipment failures, notes made in margins. Everett did not touch it. Lenora did not push. "The resort is removing this station," she said. "Not today, not tomorrow, soon enough. They say it is redundant. They say Aurora Guide has made it unnecessary." Aurora Guide? A new coordination system, digital mapping, live resort feeds, automated route recommendations, shiny enough to make donors feel immortal. That sounds useful. It is. The answer surprised him. Lenora closed the notebook. "I am not against useful things, Mr. Knox. I am against forgetting what made them useful." A small click came from the radio desk. Everett's eyes moved to the old receiver. One of the lights flickered green, then dimmed. "Still works?" he asked. "Mostly, like all of us." Lenora sat at the desk and adjusted a knob. Static breathed from the speaker, soft and grainy. Beneath it, a faint voice appeared, then vanished. Resort maintenance, maybe. Weather relay. The mountain murmuring in its sleep. She turned the volume down. "Gideon used to say this place heard fear before anyone saw blood," she said. "He had a talent for making everything sound like a campfire story. Irritating man?" The words were dry. Her face was not. Everett looked around the room again. The maps, the notebooks, the patch chair beside the radio. Bishop under the desk, the man's watch on Lenora's wrist. This was not a shrine, he realized. A shrine was built for the dead. This place was still working on behalf of the living, even if the living had stopped signing its checks. Lenora took one cassette case from the cabinet. The label had faded, but the ink remained legible. Training drill, February whiteout, G. Pike/L. Pike. She held it for a moment. "Every year," she said, "on the day Gideon died, I play a few of these. Not the bad calls, not the ones people imagine. Training calls, check-ins, weather reads, men and women saying ordinary things in careful voices. I call their names afterward." Everett's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because people disappear by inches. First, their job title changes. Then their injury is called pre-existing. Then their experience is called outdated. Then some young man in a clean jacket says the system has improved, and everyone nods because improvement sounds kinder than erasure. The stove popped. Outside, the wind brushed snow against the shutters. Lenora looked down at Bishop. A person is not gone as long as somebody still says their name with care. That is what I believe. It is not a sophisticated theology, but it has kept me from throwing mugs at several meetings. Everett gave the smallest breath of a laugh. Lenora heard it. Her mouth twitched. Then she slid a thin folder across the table. Everett did not open it. What is that? Letters, voluntary, from former patrol workers, lift operators, cooks, guides, drivers, people who were hurt keeping that mountain safe and then politely misplaced. Misplaced. It is a very clean word for a dirty habit. Everett finally opened the folder. The first letter was written in blocky handwriting. The second had been typed and printed at a library. The third included a photograph of a knee brace. He did not read deeply. He caught phrases the way a man caught sparks from a fire. After the storm shift, no longer classified, denied therapy, told seasonal status did not qualify, still cannot feel two fingers. Nobody returned my call. Nobody returned my call. His hand stopped. Lenora watched him, but did not speak. The room had changed again. No, Everett thought. Not the room. Him. The silence inside him had shifted, making space for a sound he did not want. He closed the folder. "I'm sorry," he said, because it was the safest, useless thing. "Yes," Lenora said. "Most people are. It gives them something to do with their face." That should have angered him. It did not. She stood and crossed to the window. Through the glass, the antenna tower flashed in the sun, ice-bright, absurdly noble for a structure held together by bolts and stubbornness. "Silver Lantern wants the land clear before the spring expansion," she said. "The new guest wing will have a glass lounge where people can drink $30 bourbon and look at the mountain they believe has been made safe for them by an app." "You sound bitter." "I am, but not only bitter. Bitterness is a poor radio operator. It distorts everything." Everett followed her gaze. "What do you want from me?" Lenora turned. For the first time since he entered, she seemed uncertain, not weak, just careful with the truth. "I don't know yet," she said. "Bishop does?" Under the desk, Bishop lifted his head. Everett looked from the woman to the dog. "That's not an answer." "No," Lenora said. "It's an inconvenience." Bishop rose then, slow and deliberate, and moved to stand beside Lenora. He pressed his broad head against her knee. She placed one hand on his skull without looking down. Her fingers trembled once, just once, before becoming still. Everett saw the tremor. He wished he had not, because that was the thing about pain when it stopped performing. It became harder to dismiss. A sob could be resisted. A speech could be argued with. But a single tremor in an old woman's hand, hidden in the fur of a dog who had seen too much snow, had a way of getting past the barricades. Everett set the coffee mug on the table. "I'm not joining a cause," he said. Lenora nodded. "Good. Causes exhaust me." "I'm not going to town meetings." "Wise. They are where hope goes to develop paperwork." "I'm not your rescue." At that, Lenora looked at him fully. "No," she said, "but you may be someone who remembers how to listen when the noise gets expensive." The line irritated him because it sounded too close to true. He turned toward the door. "I should go." "Of course." That was worse than if she had asked him to stay. Everett picked up his gloves. At the threshold, he paused. The old headset lay on the radio desk where Lenora had placed it, the cracked cord coiled like a dead snake. "You should keep that," he said. Lenora shook her head. "Bishop brought it to you." "It was Gideon's." "Yes?" The single word held a valley of things Everett could not cross yet. He looked at Bishop. The dog stood near the desk, steady, watching neither the door nor the woman, but Everett himself. Everett took the headset. Outside, the cold struck clean and hard. The antenna tower glowed above the trees. From the ridge, the world below looked peaceful enough to be innocent. He knew better than that. Bishop came out behind him, but did not lead this time. He stayed on the porch beside Lenora, as if the next step belonged to Everett alone. Everett descended the steps. Halfway down, he looked back. Lenora stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and Bishop at her side. Smoke rose behind them. The radio room glowed amber in the winter light. It did not look abandoned. It did not look obsolete. It looked like a heart nobody had checked on because they were afraid it might still be beating. Everett tucked the headset inside his jacket. He had come to return an object. He left, carrying a sound. Marlow Basin looked innocent from above. From the ridge road, Everett Knox could see the whole town folded into the valley like a bright card someone had tucked into Winter's pocket. Snow sat clean on the rooftops. Shop windows glowed amber. Strings of lights crossed the main street in soft arcs, and the bakery chimney sent up a sweet-smelling plume that made the morning air seem almost kind. Almost. Everett drove his old truck down from Icicle Ridge with the radio off and the cracked headset on the passenger seat beside him. He had not meant to bring it. That was becoming a pattern he disliked. The road into town curved past rental cabins, a frozen creek, and a sign welcoming visitors to Marlow Basin, where winter comes home. Under the words, someone had painted skiers, pine trees, and a smiling moon. Everett regarded the moon with suspicion. Nothing smiled that much without a marketing budget. By 9, tourists were already filling the sidewalks, wrapped in bright jackets, carrying skis, laughing too loudly in the clean cold. Children were absent from this part of the morning. The crowd was mostly adults with expensive gloves and the reckless cheer of people who believed snow was an accessory. They moved from coffee shops to shuttle stops, from gear stores to the ticket office, leaving wet footprints and perfume and the faint panic of people determined to enjoy themselves. Everett parked near the clinic. Marlow Basin Family Health occupied a low brick building beside a pharmacy and a dentist office with a wooden moose out front wearing a scarf. The clinic windows had paper snowflakes taped inside them. Someone had drawn a stethoscope on one of the snowflakes. Everett stood outside for a moment, studying the place as if it might ask him for insurance information through the glass. Bishop had not come with him. That bothered him. The dog had remained at North Lantern with Lenora the day before, watching Everett leave as if the next part of the trail was not meant for pause. Everett had told himself he was relieved. He was not. Inside the clinic, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet wool, and coffee trying its best. A man in his 60s sat with one boot unlaced and an ankle wrapped in ice. A woman in a ski patrol jacket filled out forms with the intensity of a person being interrogated by paper. Behind the front desk, a receptionist with pink reading glasses asked Everett if he had an appointment. "No," he said. "Then you're either bleeding or looking for Tessa." Everett glanced down at himself. Not bleeding? Lucky morning. She pointed down the hall. Exam room 3. If she throws something, duck. It means she likes you. Everett did not ask for clarification. In Marlow Basin he was learning that only encouraged people. Tessa Rowanfield was standing in exam room 3 with her back to him, taping a splint around the wrist of a man who looked old enough to know better and young enough to ignore that knowledge. She wore teal scrubs over a black thermal shirt, a short puffer vest unzipped at the front, and running shoes with soles made for ice. Her reddish-brown hair was clipped at the back in a way that suggested it had attempted escape several times. A pen rested behind one ear. Another was caught between her teeth. She spoke around the pen. "If you tell me you slipped on your porch, Milton, I'm writing 'injured by pride' on the chart." The man in the chair huffed. I was adjusting the snowblower. With your wrist? It was a complicated situation. Men say that when the situation was not complicated, and they were. Everett almost turned around. Tessa looked over her shoulder before he could. Her eyes were brown, quick, and deeply unimpressed. You must be Knox. I must? Lenora called. Tessa removed the pen from her mouth and pointed it at him. She said a large, quiet man might appear looking like he'd rather be elsewhere. That could describe half the county. Not with that expression. Yours has paperwork. The man in the chair, Milton, looked Everett over. He was lean but thick through the shoulders, with a gray mustache, a weather-beaten face, and hands that trembled slightly, even when resting in his lap. One of those hands had 2 fingers that did not straighten all the way. Everett Knox? Milton asked. Everett nodded. Seen your truck around. Thought you were a hermit. I prefer private citizen. Tessa snorted. Hermits always do. She finished taping Milton's wrist and helped him flex his fingers. You're not using the snowblower for 2 weeks? Driveway won't clear itself. Then marry a plow. Milton's mouth twitched. He reached for his coat, moving carefully, not from the wrist alone, but from a body that had learned to negotiate with pain 1 joint at a time. Tessa turned to Everett. You came about Lenora's notebooks. I came because people keep assuming I came. That's how communities work. Very rude system. Milton stood, then paused at the door. North Lantern still got the old ridge maps? Tessa's face changed by a shade. Some. Milton nodded as if that answered something he had not quite asked. Tell Lenora I remember the blue line near Glassfir Bowl. The official map had it wrong. Write it down, Tessa said. My hand shakes. Then talk and I'll write. He looked embarrassed, then angry at being embarrassed. Maybe later. Everett watched him go. What happened to his hand? He asked. Tessa began stripping the paper from the exam table. Which version do you want? The resort version, the clinic version, or the true one? Everett said nothing. Good choice. Good. Chera. She balled up the paper and dropped it into the bin. Milton Greaves operated lift cables for Silver Lantern for 28 winters. During a freeze event 6 years ago, a brake housing iced over. He kept the line stable long enough to get 7 adults off the chairs before the backup system locked. Frost injury, nerve damage, shoulder tear. Paperwork later called him temporary seasonal support. He worked there 28 years. Seasonally, Tessa said. That little word can fit a corpse if you fold it right. Everett looked toward the hallway where Milton had disappeared. Something inside him tightened, not yet anger, more like recognition wearing heavy boots. Tessa opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder thick with notes. Lenora said you needed to see the pattern, not just hear about it. I didn't say I needed anything. No, that would require emotional literacy. She waved him toward the back office. Come on. The office barely had room for 2 chairs and a desk. A space heater hummed under a shelf of medical supplies. On the wall hung a faded anatomy chart and a postcard of Mount Rainier someone had pinned up crooked. Tessa cleared a stack of forms from the second chair by moving them to the floor, which seemed to be her filing system for urgent truths. She laid out papers in 3 columns. Names removed, she said, tapping the first stack. I'm not handing you private medical records. These are summaries I made with permission from patients who are tired of being told their bodies are anecdotal. Everett sat. The summaries were clinical, stripped of drama. Rotator cuff injuries, chronic knee instability, cold-induced neuropathy, untreated concussion symptoms, sleep disturbance after rescue events, old fractures aggravated by winter labor. Beside each summary were employment classifications, contract, seasonal support, auxiliary kitchen, lift maintenance overflow, volunteer training assistant. The words did not look violent. That was what made them dangerous. Everett had seen violence with smoke and blood and noise. This was quieter. A man's shoulder turned into a staffing category. A woman's frost-damaged fingers turned into a budget note. Pain made tidy enough to misplace. Tessa watched him read. They don't all hate the resort. That's the thing people from outside never understand. Some of them loved that mountain. Still do. They knew every lift by sound. Knew which tourists were scared before they admitted it. Knew who needed soup, who needed oxygen, who needed someone to stop joking and check their pupils. Why show me? Because Lenora trusts Bishop, and Bishop apparently made a career decision involving you. I'm not qualified. No, Tessa said. You're overqualified in several tragic directions. Before Everett could answer, a knock came at the doorframe. A woman in a thick red sweater and cream apron leaned in, carrying a covered pot as if the clinic were an extension of her kitchen. She was round, strong, pink-cheeked, with gray-blonde hair bundled under a blue bandana. Her eyes took in Everett, the papers, Tessa, and the state of the room with equal judgment. "Soup," she announced. Tessa closed her eyes. "Darla, this is a clinic." "That's why I brought soup. People come here broken. You give them pills and bad news. I provide civilization." Darla Finch set the pot on the desk, forcing Tessa to rescue 2 folders from beneath it. Everett stood halfway because his mother had raised him before the world complicated him. Darla pointed at him. "Sit. Tall men hovering near soup make me nervous." He sat. Tessa gestured between them. "Everett Knox, Darla Finch, former head cook for Silver Lantern's Rescue Kitchen, current menace to sterile surfaces." "Former head cook," Darla said, "means I kept half that mountain from freezing and the other half from eating vending machine jerky during emergencies." "She also diagnosed hypothermia before 2 EMTs one night," Tessa added. Darla shrugged. The man's lips were blue and he insisted he was warm. Men lie to soup less than they lie to nurses. Everett looked at the pot. Darla lifted the lid. Steam rolled out, rich with onion, beef, pepper, and something green. The office became warmer by smell alone. "You were classified kitchen auxiliary?" Everett asked. Darla's expression sharpened. "Lenora's been talking." "Paperwork has," Tessa said. Darla's humor faded, not vanishing, but stepping back. "Auxiliary, support, hospitality overflow. They had names for me that got smaller every time someone needed to deny I'd been there." She looked at Everett. "But when the whiteout hit, they called the kitchen. Always. People think rescue starts with ropes. Sometimes it starts with getting hot broth into a man whose hands are shaking too hard to hold a cup." She put a bowl in front of Everett. "I'm not hungry," he said. "That's between you and your lies." He ate. It was excellent, which annoyed him. Darla grinned as if she had heard the compliment anyway. The clinic door opened again down the hall. Voices shifted. Tessa glanced toward the sound. "Harlan," she called. "Don't you dare leave without letting me look at that knee." A voice from the hallway replied, "Knees seen worse women than you." "Your knee has poor judgment." A thin old man appeared at the office door, holding a mop handle, like a walking staff. Harlan Sedge looked carved rather than born, long-faced, white-haired, under a dark knit cap, with pale eyes narrowed as though the room had weather patterns only he could see. He wore an old Silver Lantern staff jacket, the logo faded over the chest, and a name tag that read Harlan in letters too cheerful for him. He noticed Everett and stopped. "This the one Bishop fetched?" Everett looked at Tessa. "Does everyone know?" "Marlow Basin has 3 hobbies," Darla said. "Skiing, pretending not to gossip, and gossip." Harlan stepped into the office. His boots left wet marks on the floor. Bishop doesn't fetch, he selects. Everett met his gaze. That's supposed to comfort me? No. Harlan leaned the mop against the wall and pulled a small dented metal whistle from under his jacket. It hung from a leather cord at his neck. His fingers held it briefly, unconsciously, as some men touched wedding rings or old scars. North Lantern still got my West Chute notes? He asked Tessa. Lenora has everything. Good. His eyes went to the medical summaries on the desk. They'll say old men remember wrong. They like that. Makes forgetting sound scientific. Everett felt the room tighten. Darla busied herself with soup bowls. Tessa did not look away. Harlan stood there, one hand on the whistle, the other clenched around nothing. What happened to you? Everett asked. Harlan's pale eyes shifted to him. For a moment, Everett thought the old guide might tell him to go to hell. Instead, Harlan said, Mountain happened. Then paperwork finished the job. No one spoke. Outside the office window, tourists passed on the sidewalk, laughing beneath bright hats, carrying skis toward the shuttle. The sound came through the glass, muffled and cheerful, like music from another country. Everett looked at the papers again. Milton's hand, Darla's soup, Harlan's whistle, Tessa's summaries, Lenora's notebooks. Bishop under the radio desk. Separate pieces until you stood far enough back. Then they became a map, not of trails, of erasure. That realization did not arrive like lightning. It came like cold creeping through a glove seam. Slow, intimate, impossible to ignore, once noticed. Everett pushed the bowl away, though he had finished most of it. Tessa saw his face. Her voice softened by half an inch, which for her was practically a hymn. Now you see why Lenora keeps names. Everett did not answer, because he did see, and seeing had consequences. By noon, Tessa sent him across town to meet Caleb Voss, who kept an office above a closed ski rental shop and a mailbox that had not forgiven the 20th century. The stairs groaned under Everett's boots. At the top, a frosted glass door read, Voss Labor Council, though the final L had fallen off, leaving the sign to promise Labor Council. Inside, paper ruled. It occupied shelves, chairs, boxes, and one windowsill where a plant had clearly lost a jurisdictional dispute. Behind a desk piled with folders sat a thin man in a brown V-neck sweater and a tweed jacket with elbow patches. His gray-brown hair had surrendered unevenly. A pair of reading glasses hung from a cord around his neck while he searched the desk for them with increasing irritation. "Don't tell me," he said without looking up. "If you tell me, I lose." Everett waited. Caleb patted a stack of contracts, then his own head, then froze when the glasses swung against his chest. "Damn it!" He put them on and looked at Everett. "Knox?" "Yes?" "Caleb Voss. I would offer you coffee, but the machine and I are in litigation." Everett glanced at the files. "Tessa sent me." "Tessa sends people the way storms send trees through roofs." "Sit." Everett sat. Caleb opened a folder already marked Silver Lantern / Classification / Safety Data. His manner changed as soon as he touched the paperwork. The scattered man disappeared. What remained was precise, unsentimental, and sharp. "Feelings matter," Caleb said, "but feelings do not survive well in hearings unless you give them shoes. Documents are shoes." Everett stared at him. "That metaphor got away from me," Caleb admitted. "Point is, the resort has not necessarily committed one grand cinematic crime. That would be easier and less common. What I see is uglier. Reclassification, responsibility drift, safety knowledge treated as informal until it becomes inconvenient, then treated as non-existent." He pulled 3 pages free and laid them out. North Lantern Relay used to be listed as part of winter safety infrastructure, then supplementary communication asset, then legacy equipment, then non-essential structure, words shrinking the same way job titles shrank. Everett touched one page with 2 fingers. Who signed? Regional management over several years. Different names. Recently? Caleb slid another page forward. Paxton Rell. The name sat on the paper in clean black ink. Everett had seen Paxton once from a distance at the resort, a tall man in a tailored black coat walking through snow without seeming to belong to it. The kind of man who looked expensive even when standing beside a trash can. Caleb leaned back. Rell is not stupid. I prefer stupid opponents. They leave fingerprints in frosting. Rell leaves procedures. What does he want? To open the new wing, launch Aurora Guide, satisfy insurers, impress investors, and never again be poor enough to depend on people who call you family while losing your forms. Everett looked up. Caleb's face had changed slightly. His father was rescue staff, hurt years ago, badly handled by the old ownership. Rell learned the wrong lesson from a real wound. That makes him sympathetic? It makes him dangerous in a more interesting way. Later, Everett saw Paxton himself, not in a confrontation. Not yet. He saw him through the tall glass windows of the Silver Lantern Pass Visitor Center, where a launch event display had been set up beneath banners reading, Aurora Guide, the future of mountain safety. Paxton stood inside under warm lights, speaking to a small group of investors, town officials, and resort staff. He was 47, lean, polished, dark hair silvering at the temples, wearing a charcoal turtleneck beneath a black wool coat. He smiled with professional restraint. Behind him, a screen showed blue roots glowing across a digital mountain. Everett stood outside in the falling snow, unseen. Paxton gestured toward the screen, and the crowd nodded. Everett could not hear the words through the glass, but he understood the shape of them. Efficiency, integration, reliability, progress. Fine words, useful words, words that wore gloves while moving bodies out of the way. A janitor crossed the lobby behind the crowd, pushing a mop bucket. Harlan Sedge. The old guide moved slowly, staff jacket hanging loose, name tag bright under the resort lights. No one on Paxton's side of the room looked at him. Everett did. For one strange second, Harlan's reflection in the glass overlapped with the glowing digital map behind Paxton. The old man's thin body seemed to stand inside the blue lines, exactly where the system had no memory of him. Then Harlan turned a corner and disappeared. Everett stood in the snow until his shoulders were white. He had come down to town to confirm a pattern. He left knowing the pattern had names. Everett Knox spent 3 days trying not to go back to North Lantern. He repaired a hinge that did not need repairing. He sharpened an axe already sharp enough to shave regret. He stacked wood by size, then restacked it by dryness, then stood in front of the pile with the bleak satisfaction of a man who had successfully organized everything except himself. The cracked headset stayed on the shelf above the radio receiver. He had placed it there after returning from town, beside a coil of spare wire and an old compass he no longer used. It sat in the corner of his vision while he made coffee, while he ate standing up at the counter, while he pretended to read, while the late afternoon light went blue against the cabin windows. Objects should not have patience. This one did. On the 4th morning, snow fell so lightly it seemed undecided. Everett woke before dawn with the strange conviction that someone had spoken his name. No one had. The cabin was dark, the stove had settled into embers. The world outside was hushed and silver, still waiting for daylight to take responsibility. He lay there for a while, listening. That was the problem now. He had begun listening again, and once that old machinery started moving, it did not ask permission. He heard wind in the stovepipe. He heard snow sliding from a branch. He heard the cabin timbers shrink in the cold. Beneath all of it, in some narrow chamber of memory, he heard static. By 8, he was driving toward North Lantern. He told himself he was going to return the headset. Again. Properly this time. He told himself Lenora Pike had paperwork he had not finished looking at. He told himself Caleb Voss would probably need something clarified, and Tessa Rowenfield would become intolerable if left with too much moral superiority. He told himself many things. None of them explained why his hands tightened on the steering wheel when the old antenna tower rose above the trees. North Lantern Relay looked smaller under a gray sky. Without sunlight flashing off the ice, the tower seemed less like a spear and more like a bone. Smoke curled from the stovepipe. The path had been shoveled again. Near the steps, Bishop lay in the snow with his front paws crossed and his head up, as if he had been expecting Everett and had decided not to embarrass him by showing enthusiasm. Everett parked. Bishop stood, shook snow from his coat, and watched him walk toward the door. "No comment?" Everett asked. The dog turned and climbed the steps. Everett followed. Inside, the station was warmer than the morning deserved. The pot-belly stove glowed red at its belly. A kettle breathed softly on top. Lenora sat at the radio desk, not in her cardigan this time, but in a heavier gray shawl over her wool sweater. The red wine scarf looped loosely at her throat. Her silver hair was tucked behind both ears. Gideon's watch rested low on her wrist. She did not look surprised. "Coffee?" she asked. "I won't stay long." She poured 2 mugs. Everett accepted his. The room had changed since his last visit, though not in any way a stranger would notice. A cassette player sat on the table. Beside it lay 3 labeled tapes, a notebook, and a manila envelope closed with a string clasp. Bishop walked to the space under the radio desk, but did not lie down. He remained standing, his body angled between Lenora and Everett. Everett noticed. "So," he said, "this is not a social call." Lenora's mouth moved slightly. "At our age, Mr. Knox, most social calls are investigations with better manners." He set the headset on the table. "You said Bishop brought it to me for a reason." "I said Bishop seemed to think so." That's a distinction lawyers use when they want to avoid blame. "I have been speaking to Caleb too much." She touched the cassette nearest her, but did not pick it up. Her fingers rested on the plastic case for a moment, then withdrew. Everett watched the movement. Something in it did not belong to the woman who had mocked town meetings and corrected old radios with priestly confidence. "You don't have to show me anything," he said. "No," she said, "I don't." The kettle clicked on the stove. Lenora stood and crossed to the map wall. She did not take a map down. She simply looked at one of the older sheets where blue pencil marked ridges and bowls and narrow rescue routes no tourist brochure would ever admit existed. 5 years ago," she said, "there was a whiteout on the upper west face, late March, the kind of storm that arrives after everyone has started believing winter is tired." Everett didn't move. 3 resort guests cut past a closed rope line near Glassfir Bowl. 2 patrol teams went after them. Gideon took the lower traverse with Bishop and Harlan Sedge. Milton Greaves was still on lift operations then. Darla had the rescue kitchen open before anyone asked her. I was here. Her voice was even. That made the story harder, not easier. They found the guests. They got them moving. Then the wind shifted. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. One team made it back by the service road. Gideon's team had to bring a man out on a sled after he cracked his ankle badly enough to stop pretending he was adventurous. That sounds like Gideon succeeded, Everett said. He did. Lenora turned from the map. That was the trouble with Gideon. He succeeded long after a wiser man would have cursed and waited for daylight. Bishop's ears shifted at the name. Lenora returned to the table and sat. She looked down at the cassette again. North Lantern sent a request for additional support, not a formal countywide emergency, not a general alarm, just a relay call for anyone on the ridge who could assist with transport, lights, radio contact, anything. We were losing clean communication in the lower trees. Everett's throat had gone dry. Outside, snow tapped softly against the shutters. Lenora slid the cassette toward the player. Everett said, "Why are you telling me this?" Her eyes lifted to his. "Because your name is not in any of the official records," she said, "but your receiver ID is." The room did not move. Everett did not move either, which was not the same thing. Lenora opened the manila envelope and took out a photocopied page. It was a radio contact log, the ink slightly faded, the columns drawn by hand. Time, channel, transmission, receiver, notes. She turned it toward him. Everett did not want to look. He looked. There, halfway down the page, in Lenora's neat handwriting, was a notation from 5 winters ago. 2142. Ridge all signal. Detected /E-K cabin receiver, active/no response. Beneath it, 5 minutes later, 2147. Repeated call /no response. The letters on the paper remained still. Everett did not understand how. They should have crawled. They should have burned. His hand lifted before he knew what he meant to do, then lowered again without touching the page. "I wasn't on any roster," he said. "No." "I wasn't part of your team." "No." "I had no obligation." Lenora's face did not change. "That is true." The truth did not help. It sat between them like a clean knife. Everett looked away first. He remembered the night now, not clearly, not in the shape of facts, but in fragments. Wind hard against his cabin. A bottle of pills unopened on the table. The old radio receiver left on because the weather band had been muttering about road closures. Static rising, falling. A voice breaking through, distant and flattened by storm. North Lantern relay to Ridge Auxiliary, any available contact, respond. He had been standing by the stove. No. Sitting. No. He had been on the floor. That was the part he never let memory arrange. He had been on the floor with his back against the cabinet, one hand locked around the edge of the counter, trying to breathe through a body that had decided it was back somewhere else. The wind outside had become rotor wash. The radio static had become another channel, another voice, another night when a man called for help and Everett could not reach him in time. His fingers had gone numb. His mouth had filled with the taste of metal. He had heard the call again, North Lantern relay to Ridge Auxiliary. He had reached up, not to answer, to turn it off. The click had been small. The silence afterward had been enormous. Everett closed his eyes. Lenora did not spare him. She did not attack him either. That was worse. "Gideon lived," she said. Everett opened his eyes. He brought the injured guest down. Harlan nearly tore his own shoulder, keeping the sled from sliding off the traverse. Bishop stayed against Gideon's left side most of the way because the wind kept trying to turn him. They reached the lower service road after midnight. She picked up the cassette now, but still did not put it in. Gideon's hip was damaged, his back too. At first he joked about it because men like Gideon think humor is a medical plan. Then came surgeries, then infections, then pain that changed the shape of his days. Then less walking, then less radio, then, eventually, no Gideon. Bishop moved. He did not whine. He simply stepped closer to Lenora's chair and rested his broad head against her thigh. Lenora's hand lowered to his skull. This time it trembled more than once before steadying. Everett stared at the table. "I didn't know," he said. "No. If I had known it was Gideon?" "You still may not have answered." The words were not cruel. They were accurate. Everett swallowed. Lenora placed the cassette into the player. Her thumb hovered over the button. "You don't have to play it," he said. "This is not punishment." It feels like it. Many true things do at first. She pressed play. Static filled the room, not dramatic static, not the sort that belonged in films, sharp and theatrical. This was thin, worn, winter static, full of distance and cold. Everett felt his shoulders tighten before any voice came through. Then Lenora's younger voice emerged, steadier, quicker. North lantern to lower traverse, confirm position. A pause. Wind. Gideon Pike answered with a rough warmth that somehow survived the distortion. Lower traverse, still moving. Guest is complaining, which I'm taking as a good sign. Bishop disagrees with my route and is being smug about it. In the present, Bishop lifted his head. On the tape, Lenora said, "Copy that. Tell Bishop his objection has been entered into the record." Gideon laughed. It was not much of a laugh, tired, breathless, but it filled the station like sudden sunlight under a door. Everett's chest tightened in a way that made him angry. The tape continued. Route notes, wind shifts, Harlan's voice cutting in with a terse correction, Lenora coordinating, Gideon making one more joke about owing Darla soup. Then the signal thinned. North lantern to Ridge Auxiliary, any available contact, respond for relay assist. Everett stopped breathing. The tape hissed. Lenora's recorded voice repeated the call. No answer. A longer pause. Then Gideon again, fainter now. "Don't burn the air, Nora. We'll keep moving." Lenora reached forward and stopped the tape. The click sounded very much like the click Everett remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The station seemed to hold all its old breaths. The stove, the maps, the tower outside, the dog at Lenora's knee, the man at the table with his hands open and useless. Everett stood. The chair scraped loudly behind him. "I'm sorry," he said. Lenora looked up at him. He hated the phrase the instant it left his mouth. It was too small. Worse, it was tidy. It tried to fold a storm into 2 words and place it politely on the table. Lenora must have thought so too, because she did not accept it. Instead, she said, "There are people who run from battle, Everett. There are people who run toward it. And there are people who do neither. They stand very still and turn off the sound." His jaw clenched. "I was not well." "I know." That broke through more cleanly than accusation would have. She knew. The room blurred at its edges, though his eyes remained dry. That was another cruelty of age. Sometimes grief stopped giving a man the mercy of tears and simply filled his bones instead. Lenora's voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with something more difficult. "The sound does not die because we turn away from it," she said. "It waits." Everett could not stay. He left without his coffee, without the headset, without anything like dignity. Bishop followed him out into the gray morning. Lenora did not call after either of them. The drive back to the cabin had no memory afterward. The road moved under the truck. Trees passed. Snow fell. Everett arrived, parked too close to the woodpile, and sat with both hands on the wheel until his fingers hurt. He told himself the true things first. He had not been on duty. He had not been requested by name. He had not known Gideon Pike. He had not caused the storm. He had not pushed that sled. He had not damaged that hip, that back, that life. All true, all useless. He went inside and shut the door. For a while he stood in the center of the cabin with his field jacket still on. The room looked as it had that morning. Stove, table, boots, tools, bed, radio shelf. Nothing had changed. That offended him. There should have been some visible damage. A crack in the wall, a broken window, a hole in the roof through which the sky could accuse him directly. Instead, there was only the ordinary cruelty of a room waiting to be lived in. Everett took off his jacket and threw it over a chair. He did not light the stove higher. He did not make coffee. He sat at the table and stared at the grain in the wood until the lines became trails, then ridges, then radio waves, then nothing. A sound came from outside. Soft, not a bark. He ignored it. Another sound. A shift of paws on the porch. Everett closed his eyes. Go home. Bishop did not. Everett stood so abruptly the chair tipped backward. He crossed to the door and opened it. The German shepherd lay on the porch boards, snow collecting along his back and shoulders. He had followed the truck up from North Lantern or taken some old trail of his own. His amber eyes were open. His muzzle rested on his paws. He was not shivering yet, but he would. "Get out of here," Everett said. Bishop blinked. "I mean it." The dog remained. Everett stepped onto the porch. Cold hit his chest through the open collar of his shirt. "You don't live here." Bishop's tail moved once against the boards. "Lenora needs you." At her name, Bishop's ears lifted, but he did not rise. Everett felt anger flare, hot and welcome, because anger was easier than the thing underneath. "What do you want?" he snapped. "You want me to say it? Fine. I heard them. I heard the call. I turned it off." "There. That what you came for?" The forest gave no answer. Bishop did not flinch. Everett's voice dropped. "I turned it off." The sentence hung between them, not loud now, not useful, no longer defended. Bishop rose slowly. For one wild second, Everett thought the dog would leave. Instead, Bishop stepped forward and pressed his head against Everett's thigh. The contact was heavy, warm, uninvited. Everett stood rigid, arms at his sides, as if affection were a weapon he had not trained for. Bishop leaned just enough weight into him to make refusal awkward. Snow melted from the dog's fur onto Everett's pants. "Damn dog," Everett whispered. His hand lifted, stopped, then came down on Bishop's head. The fur was cold on top, warm underneath. Something inside Everett shifted then. Not forgiveness, nothing so clean. More like a door deep underground, moving an inch after years of ice. He looked out at the trees, at the snow filling the path, at the quiet ridge that had once carried a call he did not answer. Bishop did not move away. Everett exhaled. "All right," he said, though he did not know yet what he was agreeing to. He opened the cabin door wider. Bishop walked inside as if he had been waiting for Everett to remember the simplest rule of rescue. You do not leave a living thing out in the storm just because the storm embarrasses you. Everett followed and shut the door. The cabin seemed smaller with Bishop in it. Warmer, too, though that was probably a lie his body wanted to believe. Bishop circled once near the stove, then lay down with his head toward the door. Still on watch. Everett picked up the fallen chair and set it upright. His hands were steady now, which somehow hurt more. He did not go back to North Lantern that day. He did not call Lenora. But near evening, when the snow thickened and the room darkened, Everett sat at the table, pulled a sheet of paper toward him, and wrote the first words he could bear. I heard the call. He stared at them for a long time. Then, below that, he wrote, I turned it off. The words did not absolve him. They did not repair Gideon's hip, Lenora's grief, Bishop's waiting, or the years between then and now. But they were no longer trapped inside him. And for Everett Knox, who had spent half a decade mistaking silence for shelter, that was the first honest sound he had made in years. By the morning of the hearing, North Lantern Relay looked less like a forgotten station and more like a stubborn church that had refused to die politely. Darla Finch had arrived before sunrise with 2 pots of soup, a tray of biscuits, and the grim authority of a woman who believed public testimony required carbohydrates. Milton Greaves came next, carrying folding chairs in pairs, even though Tessa Rowanfield told him his wrist was not decorative and did not need another lawsuit against gravity. Harlan Sedge appeared without announcement, shoveled the steps, checked the wind, and said nothing for 23 minutes, which everyone understood as cooperation. Everett Knox arrived last, though not because he wanted to. He had left his cabin early, then sat in his truck halfway up the ridge road, watching snow gather along the hood, one hand resting on the folded page in his jacket pocket. I heard the call. I turned it off. He had not shown it to anyone. He did not know if he ever would. But carrying the words changed him. They had weight now, not enough to crush him, enough to keep him from floating back into excuses. When he finally reached North Lantern, Bishop was on the porch beside Lenora Pike, wearing no expression at all, and somehow still managing to look disappointed in the human timeline. "I know," Everett muttered. Bishop thumped his tail once against the porch boards. Lenora, wrapped in her navy cardigan and red wine scarf, looked past Everett toward the road. "Caleb said Marisol is coming." "That good?" "That depends on whether she comes to listen or to survive the appearance of listening." Inside, the relay station had been rearranged with more hope than symmetry. Folding chairs faced the radio desk. The map wall had been cleared of loose papers, leaving the old topographic sheets visible beneath cloudy plastic. On the table sat Lenora's notebooks, Tessa's patient-approved injury summaries, Caleb Voss's folders, and a battered cassette player that looked old enough to have strong opinions about modern life. The coffee maker coughed from the back counter. Darla slapped its side. It gurgled in surrender. "There," Darla said. "Democracy?" Caleb Voss looked up from a stack of contracts. He wore a brown vest over a white shirt that had surrendered to wrinkles at both elbows. His reading glasses hung from his neck while another pair sat on his head, unnoticed, like a legal parasite. "This is not democracy," he said. "This is an informal community listening session with no binding authority." Darla poured coffee into a dented metal urn. "Then why did I bake biscuits?" "Because justice is hungry." "That's the first useful thing you've said." Everett stood near the door, watching them turn the old room into something that had no official name. It was not a courtroom, not a town hall, not a memorial. The chairs did not match. The stove smoked a little when the wind leaned wrong. Someone had hung a paper sign near the entrance that read, "Please wipe boots," which seemed optimistic given the moral mud people were tracking in. Still, there was order. Lenora at the radio desk, Tessa beside the medical summaries, Caleb with the contracts, Darla at the food table, Harlan near the map wall, standing as if his bones preferred vertical weather, Milton by the stove, flexing his taped wrist when he thought Tessa was not looking, and Bishop moving slowly between all of them. Not restless, not searching. Checking. He walked down the center aisle between the folding chairs, then along the wall, pausing where the old maps met the newer printed resort trail diagrams. His yellow-black coat glowed in the firelight, his crescent-scarred ear turned toward every sound. When he passed Darla, she leaned down and whispered, "If anyone lies, Bishop, bark twice." Bishop continued walking. "Fine," Darla said. "Use your own system." The first cars arrived shortly after 9, former lift workers, 2 ski patrollers now employed out of county, a snowplow driver with a silver beard and knees that cracked audibly when he sat. A woman Everett recognized from the pharmacy who had once handled equipment inventory and now walked with a cane. A retired EMT. A mechanic. A housekeeper from the resort's older lodge. Not a crowd, exactly. More like a collection of people who had spent years learning not to take up too much space and were now uncertain what to do with chairs offered in their direction. Then came Marisol Keene. She entered with the cold air and closed the door firmly behind her. She was 52, tall enough to command a room without looming, dressed in a camel wool coat over a black turtleneck, dark trousers tucked into clean boots. Her black hair, silvering near the temples, was twisted into a low knot. She removed her gloves before shaking Lenora's hand, and Everett noticed that small courtesy because it did not feel performed. "Mrs. Pike," Marisol said, "Lenora is fine if you plan to listen. Mrs. Pike, if you plan to manage me." Marisol's mouth curved almost. "Lenora, then." Caleb stepped forward. "Commissioner Keene, thank you for coming." "I agreed to observe," Marisol said. "Not endorse. Observation is where many dangerous things begin." "Mr. Voss, I have read your emails. I am aware." Darla appeared with a mug. "Coffee?" Marisol took it. "Thank you." Darla leaned closer. "If you turn out to be useless, I'll still feed you. I just won't be cheerful about it." Marisol looked at her for one steady second, then said, "That seems fair." Everett decided he liked her, cautiously. At 9:20, Paxton Rell arrived. He did not bring a crowd. That would have made him easier to dislike. He came with one legal advisor, a narrow man in a black overcoat named Graham Tull, whose face seemed designed by a committee that disliked weather. Paxton himself wore a charcoal overcoat, dark gloves, and a navy cashmere scarf tucked with precise care. Snow did not cling to him long. It melted and vanished as if embarrassed. He greeted Marisol first. "Commissioner Keene." "Mr. Rell." Then Lenora. "Mrs. Pike, I appreciate your willingness to have a constructive conversation." Lenora looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very expensive sentence." A few people coughed to hide laughter. Paxton's smile remained calm. "I understand there are strong feelings in this room." Harlan Sedge from the map wall said, "Feelings got legs now, walked uphill and everything." Paxton turned toward him, expression smooth. "Mr. Sedge." "Harlan?" "Of course." But he did not say Harlan again. Everett noticed. So did Marisol. Caleb called the room to order, though the room resisted in small ways. A chair squeaked, the stove popped. Bishop chose that exact moment to settle beside the center aisle, like a bailiff with fur. Darla stood near the coffee, arms folded, guarding the biscuits as if Paxton might classify them as seasonal support. "This is not a legal proceeding," Caleb began. "No one here is under oath. No one is required to speak. No medical information will be shared without permission. The purpose is simple: to preserve testimony regarding winter safety work, injury patterns, and the proposed removal of North Lantern Relay as a functioning backup station." Paxton lifted one hand. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that Silver Lantern Pass has no intention of disrespecting past service. The resort is investing in the safest future this valley has ever had." Caleb nodded. "Noted. We will now hear from the past, since it apparently failed to die on schedule." The first laugh was small. Important things often begin that way. Milton spoke first. He sat near the stove with his taped wrist resting on his knee. When Caleb asked if he wanted to stand, Milton shook his head. "Standing makes people expect speeches," he said. "I have a hand that shakes and a story that doesn't." His voice was rough at first, then steadied as he described the freeze event 6 years ago. Chairlift cables humming wrong, brake housing iced over, guests stranded above the slope, frightened but still joking, because people would rather laugh than understand height. Milton had stayed at the controls until the line stabilized and the last chair cleared. He remembered the sound of metal changing pitch. He remembered his glove freezing to a lever. He remembered not feeling 2 fingers for 3 days. "When I filed for therapy," he said, "they told me seasonal classification complicated coverage. Complicated. That was the word." He lifted his bad hand. The fingers trembled in the light. "This here is not complicated. It shakes every morning." No one spoke. Paxton looked down at his notes. Marisol wrote something in her black notebook. Darla went next, though she claimed she had not planned to. She stood with a towel over one shoulder, face flushed from stove heat and indignation. "I was kitchen auxiliary," she said, making the phrase sound like spoiled milk. That means when the rescue crews came in at 2 in the morning with men shaking so hard they couldn't hold a spoon, I was apparently auxiliary to them not dying. A murmur moved through the room. Darla pointed toward the stove. Hypothermia doesn't always arrive dramatic. Sometimes it walks in laughing. Sometimes it says, "I'm fine, ma'am," while its lips turn the color of old blueberries. I learned faces. I learned hands. I learned who needed broth, who needed blankets, who needed Tessa, and who needed someone to stop calling them tough before toughness killed them. Tessa looked down, not embarrassed, moved. Darla's voice softened. "I am not asking anyone to put up a statue of me holding a ladle, though if you do, make the ladle accurate. I am asking you not to write support on paper and then treat support like it wasn't holding the roof up." Everett saw Marisol stop writing for a moment. That was the moment the room changed. Not loudly, not with applause. It changed because the people listening stopped hearing complaints and began hearing architecture. Milton was not one injured man. Darla was not one angry cook. Their stories leaned into each other like beams under snow load. Remove enough of them, and the whole pretty lodge came down. Harlan Sedge was called after Darla. He did not move at first. Bishop lifted his head. Harlan looked at the dog. "Don't start." Bishop held his gaze. Harlan muttered something about tyrants and dogs, then walked to the front. His old staff jacket hung loose from his shoulders. He removed the metal whistle from around his neck and set it on the table. The sound it made was small. Everyone heard it. "I was a guide," he said. "Then I was senior guide, then route consultant, then seasonal terrain aide, then nothing with a name that could sue anybody." Graham Tull, Paxton's advisor, shifted as if preparing to object, then remembered this was not court. Harlan looked at the map wall. "They called me a legend when guests were around. Good word, legend. Means old story. Means nobody has to pay a story's medical bills." His pale eyes returned to Paxton. "I don't need you to call me a legend. I need you to stop calling us costs." The room went so still, the radio static seemed audible, though the unit was off. Paxton's face did not change, but his hand moved to his cuff and adjusted at once. Everett had seen men under fire with less discipline. Tessa presented next. No drama, no names without permission, just patterns, cold injury, joint damage, untreated trauma, classification shifts, gaps between incident reports and medical consequences. She spoke quickly, cleanly, mercifully free of performance. "These bodies are the mountain's unofficial archive," she said, "and bodies are poor places to store public safety data." Caleb followed with contracts. He did not thunder. He sharpened. "Here," he said, holding up a page, "North Lantern Relay is designated Critical Winter Communication Infrastructure. 3 years later, Supplementary Backup. 2 years after that, Legacy Equipment. Most recently, Non-Essential Structure pending removal." He laid the pages in sequence. Language is a snowplow when used correctly. It clears a path. When used badly, it buries what someone does not want found. Lenora waited until the room had absorbed that. Then she turned on the cassette player. No one breathed much during the first burst of static. Then came voices, training drills, weather calls, route confirmations. Gideon Pike laughing faintly as Bishop objected to a path, Harlan younger and irritated, Lenora herself calmly directing traffic through bad wind. Ordinary voices, not heroic in the way songs demanded, heroic in the more difficult way, competent, tired, alive. Lenora did not look at Everett when one of Gideon's old check-ins played. He was grateful. He was also not. When the tape ended, she spoke into the silence. "These recordings are not accusations. They are proof of use, proof of knowledge. Proof that this station was not sentimental clutter. It was where human memory met weather. Marisol's pen rested motionless over her notebook. Paxton stood then, not abruptly, not angrily. He rose with the careful grace of a man trained to remain expensive under pressure. "I respect what has been shared here," he said, "genuinely, but I have to speak for the current and future safety of Silver Lantern Pass. Aurora Guide integrates live data, terrain modeling, GPS-based routing, and weather feeds at a scale this station cannot match." "Does it know the blue line near Glass Fir Bowl is wrong?" Milton asked. Paxton paused. "The system uses updated resort mapping." Harlan laughed once. It was not a kind sound. Paxton continued. "No system is perfect, but maintaining uncertified, outdated infrastructure creates liability. We cannot run mountain safety on nostalgia." Lenora nodded slowly. "No, but you appear willing to run it on omission." Graham Tull leaned toward Paxton and whispered something. Paxton ignored him. "Mrs. Pike." "Lenora." Bishop's ears lifted slightly at her voice. "If you plan to manage me—" A few people smiled despite themselves. Paxton exhaled through his nose. "Lenora, the future requires hard transitions." Darla said, "Funny how hard transitions always land on the same backs." Paxton's jaw tightened. For the first time, his eyes moved around the room, not as a presenter scanning an audience, but as a man realizing the audience contained witnesses he had underestimated. Then the door opened. Cold air entered hard. A young woman from the resort's administrative office stepped in, cheeks flushed from the climb. She looked at Paxton, then at Graham Tull, then at Marisol. "Sorry," she said. "Mr. Rell, the demolition crew is asking whether tomorrow's antenna removal is still confirmed." The room froze. That was not news to Paxton. It was news to almost everyone else. Marisol turned slowly toward him. "Tomorrow?" Paxton's expression remained composed, but the temperature of it changed. Preliminary exterior work was scheduled pending routine clearance. Caleb picked up a folder. "Interesting definition of pending." Lenora's hand lowered to Bishop's head. Everett felt something rise in him, clean and dangerous. Not rage. Rage was messy. This was older training, the moment when a room reveals the real threat, and everyone waits to see who names it. He could have named it loudly. Instead, he looked at Marisol. So did Lenora. So did Tessa. Marisol closed her notebook. The sound was soft. Final. "I came here to observe," she said. "I have observed enough to act within my office's authority." Paxton turned to her. "Commissioner, I would caution against making a decision in response to an emotional presentation." Marisol stood. Her camel coat fell neatly around her. Her voice remained level, but the room rearranged itself around it. "What I heard today was not merely emotional. I heard testimony regarding safety infrastructure, labor classification, injury patterns, and unresolved route data. I also learned that removal work is scheduled sooner than my office was led to believe." "Kedar," Graham Tull said. "Commissioner, with respect?" "With respect," Marisol said, and the words became a locked gate. "North Lantern Relay will not be dismantled until an independent winter safety review is completed. I will notify the county office this afternoon." No applause came. The room was too stunned for applause. Then Darla whispered, "Well, I guess biscuits were justified." A laugh broke, small and relieved, then vanished before becoming celebration. No one had won, not really. The station still stood under threat. The resort still had lawyers. Paxton still had money, schedules, influence, and a future polished enough to blind people who wanted to believe in it. But for the first time, he was not the only person holding the map. Paxton buttoned his coat. His smile returned, thinner now. I hope the county understands the economic implications. Marisol put on her gloves. I hope the county understands the human ones. Paxton looked at Everett then. It was the first time all morning his attention had landed there fully. Everett did not speak. He did not need to. Bishop rose from the aisle and stood beside him, broad chest forward, amber eyes calm, scarred ear tilted toward the quiet aftermath. Paxton's gaze moved from the dog to Everett's face, then to Lenora at the radio desk, then to the maps on the wall. Something like calculation passed through him. Then he turned and left with Graham Tull following in his wake. The door closed. The old station held still. Outside, the antenna tower caught a shaft of winter sun and flashed bright through the window, not like a spear now, but like a signal someone had finally noticed. Everett looked around the room, Milton's trembling hand, Darla's soup-stained apron, Harlan's whistle on the table, Tessa's papers, Caleb's contracts, Marisol's closed notebook, Lenora's steady face, Bishop waiting at his side. He understood then that North Lantern had not been saved. Not yet. But it had been heard. And for a place built to listen, that was the first real victory. The storm arrived wearing light. That was the first insult. It did not roll over Icicle Ridge like a black wall or announce itself with thunder. It came bright, white, and merciless, filling the sky with a glare so fierce that the world seemed to vanish by becoming too visible. Snow blew sideways through the trees. The road disappeared. The ridge line dissolved. Pines became pale shadows. Distance lost its authority. By late afternoon, North Lantern Relay was glowing in the whiteout like an old lantern inside a shaken snow globe. Inside, the stove burned hard. The old room smelled of wet wool, coffee, hot metal, and Darla Finch's soup, which had migrated from food into weather system. Folding chairs from the hearing were still stacked against the wall. Caleb Voss had not yet reclaimed 3 folders from the table because Caleb believed folders became more persuasive if allowed to brood. Everett Knox stood near the map wall with Bishop at his side, watching Lenora Pike tune the radio. No one had planned to gather again so soon. That was how the mountain preferred things. It waited until humans made schedules, announcements, legal requests, launch ceremonies, and polite statements about process. Then it leaned down with its old white hand and swept the table clean. The Aurora Guide launch was supposed to happen the next morning at Silver Lantern Pass. Banners had been hung in the visitor center. Investors had arrived from Seattle. A drone demonstration had been postponed twice, then optimistically rescheduled. Paxton Rell had spent the week speaking in smooth phrases about the future of mountain safety. The future at that moment was having trouble seeing past its own windshield. Lenora bent over the receiver, one hand on the dial, the other holding a pencil above her notebook. Her face had gone still in the way Everett had learned to recognize. Not fear. Not exactly. The narrowing of a person becoming useful. "Say again, lower dispatch," she said into the microphone. Static answered first, then a voice thin and broken by wind. "Silver Lantern operations to North Lantern Relay. This channel is not currently authorized for active coordination. Please stand by." Darla at the stove stopped stirring. "That sounds like a man wearing a lanyard." Lenora did not look up. "Silver Lantern operations. This is North Lantern. I am receiving intermittent emergency chatter on Old Patrol Frequency 7. Confirm whether you have missing guests near Glassfir Bowl." A long pause. Then, "Stand by." Everett looked at Bishop. The German shepherd was no longer relaxed. His ears were forward, scarred left ear tilted as if catching a sound beneath the sound. He stood with his weight evenly placed, tail low, head angled toward the west window. Tessa Rowanfield came through the door 5 minutes later with snow packed into her hair and a red medical parka half-zipped over scrubs. She carried her old brown field bag and looked like she had personally offended the storm by arriving upright. "Road's getting stupid," she said. Darla handed her coffee. Tessa took it, drank, winced. "This coffee has legal consequences." "Caleb made it," Darla said. From the table, Caleb looked wounded. "It is strong because events are strong. It is strong because Beans died angry." Before Caleb could defend the dead Beans, the radio cracked again. "Silver Lantern operations to North Lantern. We have a delayed return party, 3 adult guests, last confirmed near East Rim access. Aurora Guide is tracking probable descent toward Basin Spur." Lenora's pencil stopped. Harlan Sedge, who had been silent near the map wall, lifted his head. The old guide had arrived with ice in his eyebrows and his metal whistle tucked under his coat. His pale eyes narrowed toward the map, as if he could see through paper into the storm itself. "Basin Spur?" he said. "In this wind?" Lenora keyed the mic. "Operations. Confirm wind data source." "Stand by." Harlan walked to the map and tapped a blue pencil line near Glassfir Bowl. "If they were near East Rim before the shift, they're not dropping toward Basin Spur unless they're fools or ghosts. Wind pushes them west, toward the low fir pocket." "System says otherwise?" Everett asked. Harlan's mouth twisted. "System never lost a glove up there." The door opened again, hard enough for wind to throw snow across the floor. Owen Braddock stumbled in, carrying a tablet under his jacket like a rescued animal. He was 34, thin, pale from cold and screen light, with a brick-orange beanie pulled crooked over messy blonde-brown curls. His black technical vest was dusted white, and his eyes had the bright panic of a man who had trusted math right up until Weather began laughing. "Lenora Pike?" he asked. Lenora raised her hand without turning from the radio. "I'm Owen Braddock, Aurora Guide Technical Lead." He held up the tablet. "The model is running, but the route prediction is wrong." Darla pointed her spoon at him. "That is a brave sentence to bring into this room." Owen swallowed. "I know." That helped him more than any credential could have. He crossed to the map table and set down the tablet. A glowing digital rendering of the mountain appeared, blue route lines pulsing over white terrain. It looked clean, elegant, and absurdly calm. "The system isn't broken," Owen said quickly. "GPS is intermittent, but not gone. Weather feed is delayed, but within tolerance. The issue is the base terrain layer near Glassfir Bowl. The East Rim access data doesn't include old patrol cut-throughs or the wind shadow pocket west of the bowl." Harlan looked at him. "How do you know that?" Owen's fingers trembled over the screen. "Because your old map has a line ours doesn't." He pointed at the wall. Silence fell, not the stunned silence of accusation. Something more useful. The silence of people realizing a door had opened in the correct wall. Marisol Keene arrived on the county radio 10 minutes later, her voice clipped by distance and storm but steady. "North Lantern, this is Commissioner Keene. County Rescue is mobilizing, but delayed by road conditions. Silver Lantern is required to cooperate with all available safety assets under emergency authority. Keep this channel open." Caleb leaned toward the radio. "I adore a sentence with authority." Darla said, "Try not to marry it." Lenora began assigning roles as if the last 5 years had merely been a long, irritating interruption. "Tessa, set up medical in the east corner. Darla, hot fluids, blankets, anything that can be carried. Caleb, write down every decision, time, and speaker. Owen, feed me what your system shows and tell me when you are guessing. Harlan, Glassfir Bowl." Harlan was already at the map. "Milton?" Lenora asked. A voice from the doorway answered. "Here." Milton Greaves stepped in, breathing hard, hat crooked, bad hand tucked inside his coat. "Road's closing behind me. If anyone complains, tell them I'm seasonal." Tessa glared. You drove in this? Truck wanted adventure. You are a medical pamphlet waiting to happen. Later. Milton came to the map and pointed with 2 stiff fingers. Service cable line runs under the west trees. Old maintenance track here. If they drop below the rim, they may follow the cable towers, thinking it leads down. It does, Owen said, looking at the tablet. Milton shook his head. Not in a whiteout. Tower 4 to 5 crosses a drift shelf. Looks flat. Isn't? Owen's face went paler. Lenora keyed the mic. Silver Lantern operations. North Lantern advises probable westward displacement toward low fir pocket below glass fir bowl. Do not route party toward basin spur without confirmation. A new voice came on the channel. Smooth, controlled, recognizable even through static. North Lantern, this is Paxton Rell. We appreciate the input, but all emergency coordination should proceed through certified Silver Lantern operations and Aurora Guide control. Everett's eyes lifted. Darla whispered, "And there's the Lanyard King." Lenora's voice stayed calm. Mr. Rell, your technical lead is standing in North Lantern and has confirmed missing terrain data in your base layer. A pause. Owen looked as if he might apologize to every ancestor in the room. Paxton answered, "Less smooth now. North Lantern is not currently certified for active rescue dispatch. If an instruction given from your station results in injury..." Everett stepped toward the radio. Lenora looked at him once. He stopped. This was her desk, her storm. She pressed the mic. If no instruction is given, injury is also possible. The mountain will not wait for liability to finish putting on its boots. No one spoke for 2 breaths. Then Marisol cut in over county frequency. Mr. Rell, under County Emergency Authority, all relevant local knowledge will be treated as advisory input. Document objections afterward. Coordinate now. Caleb looked radiant. I may faint. Do it away from the soup, Darla said. The plan formed quickly, not because the room was calm, but because it knew what fear was for. Fear sharpened, panic scattered. Lenora would hold radio contact. Owen would compare Aurora Guide's live pings with old maps. Harlan and Milton would reconstruct the likely route. Tessa and Darla would prepare for cold exposure. Marisol would keep county rescue moving. Caleb would write, because later, when men in clean coats asked who had decided what, the old room would have a memory with ink. Everett and Bishop would go out, not high into glass fir bowl. That would be foolish, and this story had no need for foolish bravery dressed as heroism. Everett would take the lower forest route toward the West Service cable line, confirm whether any signal or tracks came down into the low fir pocket, and relay conditions from the edge of the dead zone. You don't have to, Lenora said quietly while the others moved. Everett pulled on his gloves. I know. That was different from before. Bishop stood at the door, ready. Harlan handed Everett a small cloth strip tied to a metal marker. Old patrol tag. Tie it where the lower trail breaks. If county comes through, they'll know you marked it. Everett took it. Their eyes met. Harlan said, Wind lies up there. Everett nodded. People too. Harlan's mouth barely moved. Wind's more honest. It means to kill you. Outside, the storm swallowed shape. Everett and Bishop moved into it. At first, the route followed a line of black firs below the ridge. Everett kept one gloved hand on Bishop's harness strap when visibility dropped to a few yards. The dog did not pull hard. He chose the ground with the same grave patience he had shown at Everett's fence, paws finding buried firmness, body leaning into gusts before they fully arrived. Snow hit Everett's face like thrown sand. His parka iced at the seams. The world became breath, boot, dog, tree, radio. North Lantern, this is Knox, he said into the handheld, entering Lower West Timber. Lenora answered through static. Copy, Knox. Keep transmissions brief. Bishop leading? Everett looked down. Bishop glanced back once, as if offended anyone needed confirmation. "Bishop leading." Darla's voice broke in faintly from behind Lenora. "Tell him he's the only one I trust." Everett almost smiled. The lower trail bent west. Twice Bishop stopped before Everett saw why. Once at a buried creek crusted thin with snow, once at a slope where powder had drifted over loose rock. Each time the dog waited until Everett found the safer line. This was not magic. That mattered to Everett. Bishop did not know the future. He knew weight, scent, wind, old paths, the map written in his body by years beside Gideon Pike. He knew what men forgot when they renamed knowledge as instinct because they did not want to admit an animal had worked harder than they had. They reached the old cable service line after 30 minutes. Everett found Tower 3 by nearly walking into it. "North Lantern," he said, breathing harder now. At Tower 3, visibility poor, wind west-southwest, drifts building a long line. Owen's voice came through, nervous but focused. "Aurora Guide shows the missing party's last phone ping east of your position, maybe 400 yards higher. But if Harlan's wind correction is right—" "It is," Harlan said somewhere in the background. "Then they could have been pushed toward your line." Everett moved on. At Tower 4, the ground changed. He felt it before he saw it. The snow underfoot became smoother, too smooth. Bishop stopped, body rigid. Everett crouched and brushed away powder. Beneath it was a hard wind slab sloping into a shallow drop hidden by blown snow. A drift shelf. Milton's warning. Everett planted the patrol tag on a low branch and keyed the radio. "Tower 4 to 5 shelf is loaded. Mark this as hazard. Do not route teams across it blind." "Copy," Lenora said. "Good mark." The words hit him strangely. Good mark, not praise, not absolution. A simple confirmation that he had heard, answered, and added something useful to the living world. Then Bishop barked once, sharp, low. Everett turned. The dog was facing downslope, nose high, ears forward, not frantic, focused. "What?" Everett whispered. Bishop moved into the trees. Everett followed, slipping between fir trunks, ducking branches heavy with snow. The wind dropped suddenly in the low pocket. The silence there was dense, muffled, almost warm by comparison. It was the kind of place a frightened person might crawl into, believing shelter and trap were different things. Then Everett heard it. Not a voice. A faint, irregular tapping, metal on metal. He lifted the radio. "North Lantern, possible sound contact below Tower 4, West Pocket. Investigating." Lenora's reply came at once. "Copy. Do not overextend." Everett moved toward the tapping. Bishop went ahead 3 body lengths, then stopped beside a cluster of young firs bowed low under snow. There, half hidden beneath branches, was a ski pole striking weakly against a buried cable marker. 3 adults huddled together in the pocket. One woman was conscious, face pale and fierce, striking the pole because she no longer had the breath to shout. A man beside her had his arms wrapped around another person whose head drooped against his shoulder. Their jackets were bright resort colors, turned ghostly with snow. Everett dropped to one knee. "Everett Knox," he said. "North Lantern Relay. You hurt?" The woman laughed once, a brittle sound. "We are very committed to complaining later." "Good. Complaining means blood's still ambitious." Bishop moved in close, sniffed each of them, then settled beside the drooping man, pressing warmth against his legs. Everett radioed their position. The station came alive in his ear. Tessa gave instructions. Lenora repeated coordinates. Owen corrected the map. Harlan identified the safest approach. Milton warned County Rescue off the drift shelf. Darla demanded to know how many blankets to curse into existence. Caleb, impossibly, asked someone to repeat the time. Above all of it, Paxton's voice came through once, controlled but stripped of polish. "Aurora Guide is updating with North Lantern route input. County team, follow combined guidance. Repeat, follow combined guidance. Everett looked at Bishop. The dog's amber eyes met his. There it was. Not victory, not forgiveness. Something better suited to the living. Usefulness. By the time County Rescue reached the low-fur pocket, the storm had begun to thin. Not stop. Never surrender. But thin enough for headlamps to appear between trees like wandering stars. The three guests were cold, frightened, and alive. Tessa took over at the lower service road with brisk mercy. Darla wrapped blankets around shoulders and scolded one man for trying to apologize before drinking broth. Harlan stood apart, watching the wind. Milton leaned against a truck and pretended his hand was not shaking. Owen knelt in the snow beside a county rescuer, entering old route data into Aurora Guide with fingers that moved faster than his fear. Paxton arrived last at North Lantern, coat-iced at the shoulders, face pale from more than cold. He entered the station while Lenora was still at the radio desk. Everett stood near the wall with Bishop beside him, both of them wet, tired, and carrying the storm in their bones. Paxton looked at the maps, at Owen's tablet, at Harlan, at Milton, at Lenora. For once he seemed to have misplaced the correct sentence. Owen spoke before anyone else could. The system needs them. Paxton turned toward him. Owen's voice shook but did not retreat. Not as decoration, not as legacy reference, as data, real data, route corrections, wind pockets, old patrol cuts, radio dead zones. Aurora Guide can use it. It should have had it already. Harlan said, "Could have asked." Owen swallowed. "I know." Paxton's gaze moved to Everett. Everett expected defense, some polished arrangement of liability, gratitude, and control. Instead, Paxton said quietly, "Authorize the integration." Graham Tull was not there to object. Perhaps the storm had done one merciful thing. Lenora looked at Paxton. "Emergency only?" Paxton's jaw shifted. "No," he said. "Start with emergency. Continue after review." No one cheered. The moment was too complicated for cheering. 3 people had nearly died because a beautiful system did not know what an old room knew. 3 people had lived because enough forgotten hands reached toward the same signal at once. Paxton had not become good. Everett had not become clean. North Lantern had not been saved forever. But the lie that old knowledge was useless had cracked, and cracks mattered. Everett stepped outside before the room could become too warm. The storm had faded to falling snow. The world below remained blurred, but the sky had opened in one narrow place, showing a cold strip of stars. Bishop came to stand beside him. The dog leaned lightly against Everett's leg, not because Everett was falling, but because standing together was also a kind of answer. Behind them, through the walls of North Lantern, the radios continued to murmur. Not one signal. Many. For the first time in years, Everett did not wish for silence. He listened. After the whiteout, Marlowe Basin tried, briefly, to behave as if nothing had changed. The bakery opened at 6. The shuttle buses climbed toward Silver Lantern Pass. Tourists bought goggles, complained cheerfully about sore calves, and took photographs beneath roofs still heavy with snow. The town returned to its ordinary winter music. Boots on sidewalks, espresso machines screaming, lift cables humming above the slopes like long steel prayers. But something had shifted under the snow. Not loudly, not enough for visitors to notice. The mountain did not tilt. The sky did not split. No statue rose in the square with Everett Knox looking noble and Bishop looking better, though Darla Finch said Bishop would have handled marble with dignity. The change came in smaller, more dangerous forms. A county notice posted on the door of Silver Lantern's administrative office, a temporary hold on demolition permits, a required independent winter safety review, a labor classification audit. a meeting that Paxton Rell attended without a scarf. That, Caleb Voss said afterward, is how you know a man is under pressure. The review did not make headlines beyond the county paper, whose reporter described North Lantern Relay as a legacy communication structure, a phrase Lenora Pike read aloud with the expression of a woman considering whether ink could be punished. Still, the article named the missing guests who had been found alive near Glassfir Bowl. It named Aurora Guide. It named North Lantern. It named the use of historical route data and local rescue knowledge. Names mattered. Lenora clipped the article and pinned it beside the old maps, not because it was beautiful writing, but because it was written proof that the station had not imagined its own usefulness. For 2 weeks, people came and went from North Lantern with clipboards, laptops, county badges, measuring tools, thermoses, and the startled faces of officials discovering that old buildings could be more organized than new committees. Owen Braddock practically moved into the station, sitting at a folding table beneath the map wall with his cracked tablet, 3 charging cords, and a notebook full of questions. He asked Harlan Sedge to mark wind shifts near Glassfir Bowl. Harlan stared at him. Wind shifts? Because wind has moods. Owen, who believed every mystery deserved a data field, wrote, variable mood-based directional behavior. Harlan saw it and said, you write like a man asking to be buried. But he stayed. Milton Greaves came in the afternoons and sat beside Owen, tapping old cable routes with 2 stiff fingers. He could not draw clean lines anymore, so Owen learned to wait. That was the first lesson the young technician received from the old mountain workers. Knowledge sometimes moved through damaged hands, and speed was not the same as accuracy. Darla reopened the rescue kitchen before anyone officially authorized such a thing. She claimed the stove had been lonely. Within 3 days, the room smelled of onion soup, cinnamon coffee, buttered biscuits, and human beings, slowly remembering how to sit together without apologizing for taking up space. Tessa Rowanfield set up a temporary care corner near the east window, where light came in gently during clear mornings. There were resistance bands, heating pads, a battered exam stool, and a sign Darla had made that read, "If you lie about pain, Tessa will find out." Tessa denied writing the smaller note beneath it, and Darla will feed you anyway. Everett suspected both women were guilty. He kept his suspicion to himself because he had learned some truths were best left operational. The negotiations took longer than the rescue. That was another insult, though a predictable one. Saving 3 people in a whiteout had required courage, memory, radios, soup, and a dog. Saving a place from paperwork required all those things, plus patience, which Everett considered less natural than frostbite. Marisol Keene handled the county side with calm precision. She arrived in her camel coat, removed her gloves before shaking hands, and made people nervous by being polite in complete sentences. Under her authority, the County Safety Office required Silver Lantern Pass to preserve North Lantern as a backup coordination and training site during the review period. Caleb, meanwhile, did what Caleb did best. He turned outrage into paragraphs no one could safely ignore. People underestimate the paragraph, he told Everett one afternoon, holding up a draft agreement. A good paragraph can make a rich man sweat through wool. Everett looked at the 6-page document. That thing has paragraphs with subparagraphs. Those are the teeth. The final agreement was not justice in the grand, clean sense. No thunderbolt struck the resort. Paxton Rell was not dragged into the town square, pelted with snowballs by retirees, and forced to wear a sign reading, "I mistook people for expenses," though Darla admitted she had considered the logistics. Instead, the agreement was smaller and sturdier. Silver Lantern Pass would contribute to a winter labor recovery fund as a condition of continuing expansion. Worker classification practices would be independently reviewed. Former patrol, lift, kitchen, transport, and maintenance staff could submit claims for medical support tied to documented winter safety work. Aurora Guide would be updated with historical rescue routes, known radio dead zones, wind pocket notes, and terrain corrections from veteran workers who would be paid as consultants rather than honored as decorations. North Lantern Relay would remain. Not as a museum, not as a sentimental shack for old voices, as a county-supported winter safety training and recovery center. The funding came from several hands, none generous enough alone and all necessary together. County emergency preparedness money, Silver Lantern's required contribution, a grant from a mountain rescue nonprofit, donated materials from local tradespeople, and labor from the very men and women once told their usefulness had expired. Darla called that last part rude but satisfying. The day they painted the new sign, snow fell in lazy flakes, no wind, no drama. Harlan held the ladder while Milton argued about whether it was level. Owen stood 10 feet back, using his tablet as if the future itself had been reduced to a carpenter's square. Tessa informed all three of them that if anyone fell, she would treat them after she finished laughing. Everett stood with the paintbrush in his hand. The old sign had been taken down carefully. North Lantern Relay. The letters were cracked, weather-bitten, stubborn. Lenora had run her fingers over them once and then nodded for Everett to continue. The new sign was cedar, sanded smooth, dark letters burned into the grain. Lantern House, Winter Safety Training, Recovery, Relay. Everett painted the final coat of sealant over the words. His hand was steady. Not because he was healed. That was not what healing meant. He was beginning to understand. Healing was not the absence of tremor. It was choosing what to do while the hand still remembered shaking. Behind him, Bishop lay in the snow beside the steps, watching the whole operation with the solemn boredom of a king forced to supervise peasants. Darla crouched near him. If you had thumbs, this would have been finished by breakfast. Bishop blinked. Don't take that tone with me. Lenora stood just inside the doorway, Gideon's watch low on her wrist, her red wine scarf tucked into her cardigan. She had not cried when the old sign came down. She had not smiled when the new one went up. She simply watched with the grave attention of someone seeing a name change without a burial. Everett stepped down from the ladder. "You all right?" he asked. Lenora looked at the sign. "No," she said. He nodded. Then she added, "But I am grateful." Those two truths stood together without fighting. That, Everett thought, might be another kind of shelter. Paxton came once before the opening, not for ceremony, not for apology, though some people looked hungry for one in the way crowds sometimes hunger for a clean ending. He arrived in a dark overcoat, no advisor beside him, and stood at the back of the room while Owen demonstrated the first Aurora Guide update linked to North Lantern's historical maps. On the screen, old and new routes appeared together, blue digital lines beside hand-drawn corrections, wind notes, cable service paths, low fur pockets, closures that had never made it into the resort brochure but had lived for years in Harlan's head and Milton's damaged fingers. Owen spoke nervously, but with pride. "This version doesn't replace field judgment," he said. "It prompts for it. If the model enters a known uncertainty zone, it requests human terrain confirmation." Harlan grunted. Machine-learned humility. Owen smiled faintly. "We're calling it layered verification." Humility's shorter. Paxton listened without interrupting. His face was controlled, but Everett saw the small shifts now, the tightening near the jaw, the pause before certain words, the way his eyes moved when former workers spoke, and he had to decide whether to see them or sort them. After the demonstration, Paxton approached Lenora. The room noticed. Lenora did not make it easier for him. "Mrs. Pike," he began. "Lenora," she said, "if you are here as a person." He absorbed that. "Lenora," he said. It was not much, but it cost him something. "My father was a lift rescue lead," Paxton said. "Before my time here, different ownership, different mess." He was hurt during a storm response and spent the rest of his life arguing with forms. He looked toward the map wall, not at her. "I told myself the answer was to build something forms could not ignore." Lenora's expression did not soften into forgiveness. Everett respected her for that. "And instead?" she asked. Paxton's mouth tightened. "I built something that ignored people." The room was quiet enough for the stove to become eloquent. Lenora nodded once. "Then help it learn better." No embrace, no absolution, no choir of winter angels descending through the rafters with tasteful lighting, just a sentence and the work it demanded. Paxton left soon after. Darla watched him go and whispered, "I still don't trust his coat." Caleb said, "Never trust a coat that fits that well." Life at Lantern House began before anyone declared it open. A snowplow driver came in with a shoulder that had not healed right and left, with Tessa's referral and Darla's soup. Two younger ski patrollers sat with Harlan for a class on wind reading and emerged looking as if they had been scolded by a mountain through a human intermediary. Milton recorded cable line notes for Owen, speaking slowly while Owen typed every word. Caleb held office hours at the corner table and complained that helping people gave him indigestion. Lenora changed the radio routine. For years she had played old tapes to keep the dead from vanishing. Now she still played them, but not as an ending. She used them as lessons. "Listen here," she told a group of new patrol trainees one morning, pausing a recording of Gideon's voice. "Hear that? He jokes twice in 30 seconds. That was not confidence. That was pain management. If you hear a rescuer joking too neatly, check what they are not saying." The trainees listened. So did Everett. He had taken the part-time job because someone needed to open the building early, check the stove, clear the steps, repair equipment, inspect backup batteries, and teach basic emergency response to people who thought gloves were optional until weather educated them. These were all practical reasons. They were not the whole reason. Every morning, Everett drove down from his cabin before sunrise. Sometimes Bishop came with him from Lenora's porch. Sometimes Bishop was already waiting at Lantern House, having apparently traveled by methods unavailable to law-abiding mammals. Everett stopped asking. He would unlock the door, step inside, and turn on the light over the radio desk. Such a small act, a key, a hinge, a room warming. Yet each morning, some old locked place inside him opened by the same fraction. He still had bad nights. He still woke with static in his head. He still carried the folded page in his jacket pocket, the one that said what he had done. But the page no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like a witness, a hard one, an honest one, the kind that kept a man from confusing silence with peace. On the first official morning of Lantern House, snow fell bright over Icicle Ridge, not blinding like the storm. Gentle, silver, the kind of snow that made the world look newly made while leaving every buried thing exactly where it was. People arrived in ones and twos, Milton with a thermos, Darla with a pot large enough to require political oversight, Tessa carrying medical supplies, Caleb muttering at his own paperwork, Owen with his orange beanie and tablet, Harlan with his whistle, Marisol with a county folder and a rare smile. Former workers came too. Some limped, some laughed too loudly. Some stood in the doorway too long, as if unsure whether a place built partly from their pain would truly let them enter without asking them to prove it again. Everett stood on the porch in his olive combat shirt under a dark field jacket, hair ruffled by the cold, the faded tattoo on his right forearm visible where his sleeve had ridden up. Bishop stood beside him, shoulder touching his leg. The dog's black and gold coat was dusted with snow. His scarred ear tilted toward the gathering voices. He looked older in the morning light and more royal for it. Darla came up the steps and pointed at him. Bishop, If you start charging admission, I want a percentage." Bishop looked away. "See?" Darla said to Everett. "Management." Everett almost smiled. Almost was no longer the safest version. Inside, Lenora sat at the radio desk. The old headset, Gideon's training set, cracked and carefully repaired enough to rest without falling apart, hung on a wooden peg beside the new unit. Below it, a brass plate had been fixed to the desk. "Keep listening." Lenora pressed the transmit button. Her voice carried through the room speakers, calm, clear, and alive. "Lantern House to all stations," she said. Then she paused, and Everett saw her glance at Gideon's watch, at Bishop, at the doorway full of people still arriving. Her voice steadied into something larger than memory. "North Lantern is listening." Everett closed his eyes for half a second. The words did not strike him as a call for help this time. They sounded like a promise kept badly, then kept better. Behind him, the door opened again, letting in cold air and another person with snow on their boots. Everett stepped aside to make room. For most of his life, he had believed courage meant entering dangerous places. Now he was learning another version. Sometimes courage meant leaving the door open and staying there long enough for others to come in. Bishop leaned lightly against his leg. Everett put one hand on the dog's head, felt the cold fur, the warm life beneath, and looked into the room where the forgotten were being called by name. Then he stepped inside, not away from the snow, not away from the past, into the work that remained. Sometimes the most important call in our lives does not come as a shout. Sometimes it comes as a quiet tug on the heart, an old memory, a loyal dog waiting at the door, or a person whose pain we almost walked past. Everett's story reminds us that grace does not always erase what we failed to do. Sometimes grace gives us another morning, another door to open, another chance to listen better than we did before. So if there is someone in your life who needs to be heard, may you have the courage to pause. And if you are the one waiting to be heard, may God send you a small light in the snow. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you want more stories of loyalty, healing, and quiet miracles, please subscribe and join us for the next one.